Israel preempted everything, preempted the negotiations, and started the war. We're simply joining it as a co-belligerent. Effectively, we're already in it, but now we're a co-belligerent, and there are all sorts of insane notions that this is somehow or another going to contribute to containing China, of all things.
So recently, Douglas Macgregor was on Andrew Napolitano's podcast talking about why he thinks it's so crazy that the U.S. is supporting Israel's strike on Iran, what the ramifications are for the U.S., and how deeply involved Trump was in planning this whole thing. So let's watch and let's react. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
No matter what we're talking about, and these topics are not happy, it's a pleasure to be able to have the benefit of your analysis. Thank you for accommodating my schedule today. How did Prime Minister Netanyahu dislodge President Trump from the thinking of his own intelligence community, MI6, and even Mossad, and belatedly the IAEA, that Iran does not have and is not working on a nuclear weapon? How did Netanyahu turned Trump around on that to the point where he publicly rebuked his director of national intelligence, saying, "I don't care what she says, I'll believe what I want to believe"?
Good question.
First, I think we need to understand that whatever Tulsi Gabbard says is her opinion. She's a senior advisor on intelligence to the president, but she's not the only one. And we have to go back to the Central Intelligence Agency. And as far as I've been able to discern, nothing, absolutely nothing has changed in the Central Intelligence Agency in terms of its findings that ultimately shaped national policy since Donald Trump took over. That means that you've got to go back over the last 5 years. Obviously, we don't have access to those findings directly, but those findings have not changed. So Tulsi Gabbard's opinion, while I certainly value it and I'm confident that she's telling the truth, is something that he can wave off and express complete disinterest in. That's very easy. And that's not the first time. We've had presidents that dismissed intelligence findings left and right. I mean, we got to go all the way back to the summer of 1941 when FDR directed the Navy to maintain the Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor. And the commander-in-chief of naval forces in the Pacific immediately wrote to the president and said, "This is a serious mistake. We're presenting a target array for the Japanese, even though we don't think the Japanese will attack Pearl Harbor." At that point, everybody thought they'd attack the Philippines. And President Roosevelt said, "Thank you very much. Keep the fleet where it is."
Yeah, this is an area maybe I disagree to some extent. The agenda always matters more to politicians than the intelligence. And you're trusting Tulsi Gabbard as your national director of intelligence to provide you what the U.S. consensus is on intelligence, because it's essentially an overarching czar above all the intelligence services about what the truth is. So it's a little bit flippant to see Trump shrug her off as just though she's another person, because there's no real alternative argument here that says Iran has a nuke or they're close to a nuke. Tulsi Gabbard even went as far as to say there's no evidence they restarted their nuclear program since 2003. Yeah, they're enriching uranium. That's because it's for nuclear power. There's some medicinal purposes to that too, but I guess I disagree to some extent with Macgregor here in that Trump can so easily disregard Gabbard and come off as being legitimate of it. It actually is uncharacteristic of his arguments in my mind here.
So we've had presidents wave this kind of thing off before. And I don't know that Mr. Netanyahu had to work very hard.
Yeah, to that extent, I agree with them. I mean, presidents have waved this stuff off in order to pursue their militaristic agenda, and certainly Trump is linked at the hip with Netanyahu. So in that regard, I think he's right. Just want to be clear there.
I think he's got, right now in the Senate, in the intelligence community, inside the White House, large numbers of people who are telling President Trump, Iran is really a pushover. It's not strong. We can crush it. And you need to go ahead with this. This is in the interest of Israel and the United States. Obviously, I don't think it has anything to do with the interests of the United States, but I think that's where we are.
But these arguments which I agree are being made ferociously by members of the Congress. These are political arguments. They're not based on intel. Surely these members of Congress don't have intel that contradicts what CIA, MI6, and even Mossad have found.
That's exactly right. This is the perfect counter to that. This is the best argument he's made here. Napolitano's right on the mark. What is their alternative narrative regarding the nuclear acquisition? They don't have one. They don't cite one. They never cite one. They just say Iran can't have a nuclear weapon because it's part of the propaganda campaign to drum up war and drum up U.S. involvement in this war, to our peril, by the way.
Well, we don't know that MI6, Mossad, and the CIA are all 100% in agreement. What we do know is we have a long, long record of assessments that inevitably come down on the point that Iran doesn't have a weapon. Now, that may not make any difference in any case to Mr. Netanyahu and, frankly, Mr. Trump at this point. Their view may be, well, why should we wait around another 6 months, another 6 years for Iran to acquire such a weapon? And so we might as well strike now and preempt this. And we're talking about a preemptive war. Remember, Israel preempted everything, preempted the negotiations, and started the war. We're simply joining it as a co-belligerent. Effectively, we're already in it, but now we're a co-belligerent. And there are all sorts of insane notions that this is somehow or another going to contribute to containing China, of all things. And of course, you've got people that are convinced that China and Russia are permanent enemies of the United States that have to be crushed, have to be contained. All of this is bound up in the same sort of set of fantasies about Iran.
Yeah, I think he's right on the mark there. The idea that this contains China in any way is complete lunacy to me because, if anything, this pushes Russia, who is Iran's ally, by the way, which also jeopardizes chances for peace in Ukraine, by the way, more into the hands of China. So how does this contain China by driving a wedge even deeper into what is the NATO versus BRICS alliance? It seems to do the opposite to the greatest extent possible. And that's the other fact that people are forgetting about how this impacts U.S. foreign policy in general. Trump came into office with an agenda item that he routinely talked about, establishing peace between Ukraine and Russia. He hasn't done that. He actually hasn't changed policy to much of an extent at all, except for shutting down aid to Zelensky for a period of 6 or 7 days in there. But he's restored it. Now, do I think he'll go back to Congress and get more money? No. But if anything, you're Putin watching this situation. How can the U.S. be trusted? Look at how they handled this. The diplomatic negotiations with Iran, at least at some point, became a sham. They might have started out with earnest intentions, but then the administration shifted from the mandate no nuclear weapons program to no enriching uranium, and that's a dead letter. That's a non-starter poison pill that was never going to produce or bear any diplomatic fruit.
Chris, play the CNN montage. Do we have that of Prime Minister Netanyahu? Colonel, this goes back 30 years. His claiming that Iran is within days and weeks, 30 years of a nuclear weapon. Watch this.
The deadline for attaining this goal is getting extremely close. And Iran, by the way, is also outpacing Iraq in the development of ballistic missile systems that they hope will reach the eastern seaboard of the United States within 15 years. By next spring, at most, by next summer, at current enrichment rates, they will have finished the medium enrichment and move on to the final stage.
The final stage. Look at that graphic. This is just pure propaganda. A bomb that's lit. And the final stage was close in 2012. This is just crazy. I can't believe people continue to swallow this up, especially from this guy, after so long of getting it wrong. So many examples of getting it wrong. And then he's the guy we're hanging our hats on the war propaganda campaign. This is the banner waver spearheading the whole thing. It's crazy.
From there, it's only a few months, possibly a few weeks, before they get enough enriched uranium for the first bomb. The foremost sponsor of global terrorism could be weeks away from having enough enriched uranium for an entire arsenal of nuclear weapons. That would place a militant Islamic terror regime weeks away from having the fissile material for an entire arsenal of nuclear bombs.
If not stopped, Iran could produce a nuclear weapon in a very short time. It could be a year, it could be within a few months, less than a year.
None of that is true, is it?
No, but we have to admit that he's had enormous success.
Yes.
Keep in mind that he was able to drag us into Iraq on a false pretext. And in front of Newt Gingrich and Donald Rumsfeld, Paul Wolfowitz made the statement straight up, we just want to get the U.S. Army into Iraq. That's what we want. We don't care about anything else. Our goal is to get the Army into Iraq. They got the Army into Iraq. And of course, the whole thing was a catastrophe. We're going to see something far, far worse once we go to war with Iran, which effectively we're already in hostilities with Iran, but this will be a direct attack. And it's going to have terrible consequences because it's not going to work out as planned.
Clearly, and all the history tells us that, especially in my lifetime. Look at all these failed regime operations. He talked about Iraq, and he's totally correct to his credit. Netanyahu testified in front of Congress trying to sell this thing, along with the propaganda sold by the neocons. They weren't all Jewish, by the way. They were Cheney and Bush and Rumsfeld, too. And they were all complicit in this thing. They all shared similar goals. It went back to the Project for a New American Century. They've wanted that war for a long time to finish what was started in Saddam's invasion of Kuwait over a slant drilling dispute. But look at how it's turned out in Libya and Syria and all these countries. Afghanistan, it's disastrous. The U.S. spends too much money, expends far too much military might. Our civil liberties get curtailed at home. This is what created the TSA, created the Patriot Act, created the NSA mass surveillance system in its infancy, was based upon these pretenses. It's all disastrous, and Macgregor's so correct in he'll pay off to be a prophet. Watch this, and then watch how this transpires. It's not going to be pretty for the U.S., and I think he's right on the money here.
Colonel, how badly did Israel damage Iran's defenses? It appears that the euphoria from Israel and from the mainstream media, which was pervasive last Friday, has now dissipated considerably.
Well, the initial assault seemed to be effective, and we lose sight of certain realities. Let's assume that you managed to kill the top 5 or 7 or 10 people. They are simply going to be replaced. And in many cases, they could end up being infinitely more capable and more courageous and innovative than the people they're replacing. Stalin killed 34 to 35,000 officers in the Soviet army just before the Germans invaded. And ultimately, it turned out to work to Soviet advantage because the general officers that then emerged were infinitely better than most of the people that Stalin had shot. This is a false notion. Then this is bound up with the regime change myth that somehow or another people, millions of Iranians, are going to turn on their own government and beg Israel and the United States to come invade their country and govern them. It's all sheer lunacy.
Totally is hard to deny. Regime change is always a blight, and it's a plague upon the U.S. It's the U.S. foreign policy lead expedient, and it's treacherous, it's terrible, it never benefits us, and yet we still have these neocons selling these same wars in the same ways. There's so many ways in which this is reminiscent of the run-up to the war in Iraq, and it's especially ironic because you have a country with nukes. It's the worst kept secret in the world of geopolitics right now, Israel, firing upon a country because it could acquire nukes but doesn't yet. And ironically, Iran is a member of the IAEA, bound to specific limitations regarding uranium enrichment, but Israel's not, despite having nukes. There's so many absurdities to this whole thing, and for us to even be wrapped up in it is just alarming and insane.
Did the Israelis substantially damage Iran's nuclear enrichment capability for civilian purposes, Iran's air defenses, Iran's offensive weaponry?
Well, it seems as it's pretty clear that the integrated air defenses were rapidly repaired and placed back into operation within the first 24 hours. And that certainly surprised me. I did not think they would rebound as quickly as they did, but they did. As far as the nuclear facilities themselves are concerned, there are at least 3 known. There may be others, but the one that was damaged has since been repaired. Is it still vulnerable? I'm sure it is. The other 2, Pickaxe and Fodor, are not very vulnerable, and I'm sure there will be an attempt to hit them. But I don't think it's going to work out. You know, these are very complex operations, Judge, involving not just a single weapon or 2 or 3 weapons, but involving air and naval power on a strategic level. Anything can go wrong. And then, of course, we still have the 40,000 U.S. soldiers, sailors, airmen, and potentially some Marines on the ground in the Middle East. What happens to them? We can't protect them. That's an established fact. So as we go ahead with this, since we can't protect them, we have to assume that they'll be targets and we'll take severe losses. We haven't even talked about the surface vessels that are in the Red Sea, the Mediterranean, or the Indian Ocean that can be targeted, since they can be found. And if it can be targeted, they are at risk of being destroyed.
Yeah, and the other thing about Israel's decapitation strike, too, is that was only successful maybe under the eyes of those who support it, if regime change is the goal. And clearly I think it is. Because what is the pretense they're still using? It's the nuclear weapons program, but they didn't target any nuclear sites, supposed nuclear weapons sites, enrichment sites. Not at all. They went straight to Tehran, which is a place that's a metropolis, really the biggest metropolis in Iran. I think there's about 10 million people within the city. I think about 14 million within the limits of the city, the surroundings as well. And they went straight there to decapitate some of these high-ranking generals, and in the process, a bunch of innocents, of course. That always happens when you bomb residential complexes, which Israel led with, by the way. But if your goal really was to limit the nuclear weapons program, why wouldn't you take out those things? We've always known. It's always been about regime change. The whole facade about nuclear weapons is just a manner through which to sell it. It's just a tactic to produce war propaganda. It's not the aim. The aim is regime change. It always has been. Netanyahu's talked about it forever. He wants the Libya model to apply there, which was regime change. And the U.S. has long planned to overthrow Iran. And we know that because Wesley Clark admitted it. The Supreme NATO Allied commander went into the Pentagon and saw a classified memo saying that the U.S. was planning this regime change operation when he walked in 2001. And there were 7 countries in 5 years that they wanted to overthrow. Iran was the last one. Guess how many they've already overthrown? 6. Iran's the last one. They're so brazen they don't even change their tactics.
Can the United States, I never even knew this existed, Colonel, 30,000-pound bombs. Do we have these?
Well,
if we drop them, can they destroy the underground Iran nuclear enrichment facilities?
Well, contrary to popular belief, there are different opinions on that subject. The 30,000-pound bombs may be effective and they may not. There are numbers of people who insist they won't be, particularly when it comes to Pickaxe and Fodor. That the mountains that they have to penetrate and the concrete barriers that have been established are simply too great. There are people arguing that you have to use a low-yield nuclear weapon to do the job with minimal radiation or residual radiation that could potentially work. I don't know. I'm not an Air Force armaments expert. I have no idea. But I simply warn that whatever our expectations are, we should probably scale them back.
How badly did Iran damage Israel's defenses and damage Israel itself with Iran's retaliation? Do we know? Because I know the Israelis are not making this apparent and suppressing the news.
Well, you have seen the quote from Ben-Gvir because he was asked, why are you turning now to the Americans so soon? This is after the first 72 hours. And he said, because we didn't understand or appreciate the enormous striking power of the Iranian missile arsenal. So I think the Israelis are in bad shape. About a third of Tel Aviv has been damaged or destroyed, and I'm sure that will continue. As far as their military installations are concerned, I'm told that they're flying a lot of aircraft out of the country. Many are being flown to Cyprus in order to avoid being struck. I think Israel is on the ropes, to be blunt. It has only a few days left in terms of anti-missile missiles, in other words, air defense capability. And some people have described to me, they're on the ground over there, the Iron Dome as a giant sieve.
Yeah.
Well, they certainly rely on the U.S. to have their back every single time. I think that was a big gambit on Netanyahu's part. If he ever thought that there's a chance that Trump might break with him on this policy, he decided to take a risk to end the U.S. negotiations with Iran, an underhanded strike that would force Trump's hand. Either at that point, Trump had to disavow what Israel was doing or join in and pretend it was awesome. And I think we all know what happened if you've seen Trump's Truth Social account. He's basically joined Netanyahu, said it's awesome. He sent interceptor missiles to help out. They send Israel intelligence. We've continued to send military aid. That's all that it would take to break this alliance, by the way, is to threaten to withhold aid unless you stop, or just withhold aid until you stop. It won't happen because the U.S. government is so under the control of the Israel lobby and Netanyahu personally, but that's the truth.
Iron Dome is a giant sieve. How will, let's say President Trump does order these 30,000-pound bombs to be dropped and whatever other military coordination is necessary to effectuate them, and all hell breaks loose. How do you expect Russia, China, Pakistan to react?
First of all, you're talking about at least 100 aircraft that will be employed if you go after these nuclear sites, because it's not just a function of a B-2 or B-1 bomber flying overhead and dropping munitions. You have to suppress enemy air defenses, or at least try to. You try to knock out whatever you can in terms of radars and air defenses to clear the way, or create a corridor, if you will, that will allow these aircraft to approach close enough to deliver their weapons. So this is a major operation. I think the Chinese, the Russians, everyone will wait to see how this first operation comes off. And then I suspect that in addition to the entire Islamic world, which will line up with Iran against Israel and the United States, I think the Chinese and the Russians will then decide just exactly what they want to do and what will be helpful. But keep in mind that the Chinese and the Russians are not interested in going to the next level. That is, going beyond a regional war and making this thing global. They would prefer not to do that. So whatever they do will be a function of how this first phase of the operation is carried out.
Do you give credence to the reports that Pakistan might use its nuclear weaponry to attack the Netanyahu regime?
I think that Pakistan would certainly turn over nuclear warheads to another Muslim country under this kind of threat. For many, many years, the Pakistanis have made it clear to their friends in Ankara that they would provide the Turks with nuclear warheads that the Turks could then mate to missiles and use if necessary. What no one expected was that a Sunni Muslim country like Pakistan, that has a certain amount of friction with Iran because it's a Shia state, would also do the same thing for Iran, but I suspect they will. In other words, I don't think Pakistan will launch something from Pakistan. Whatever happens, it will come from another location, probably in Iran or somewhere else nearby, and therefore be used against us and Israel. Now, when I say us, we're not really representing target arrays at this point for nuclear weapons. And I don't think to suppress us or damage us, the Iranians need a nuclear weapon. If there were a nuclear weapon involved, It would only come in response to something the Israelis did. And if the Israelis use a nuclear weapon, they can bet 100% that one will be thrown back at them.
Yeah, if anything, they're incentivized to create one really quick now, that's for sure. I don't think there's really any going back on that. Once it was made known that these negotiations were duplicitous, and in fact, the U.S. didn't intend, at some point at least, to carry them through, they put in a poison pill of no nuclear enrichment, and Trump was on board with helping to plan this strike, apparently, for several days. Then the Iranians are ultimately convinced to do this. Remember the examples between North Korea and Libya. North Korea developed nukes, they have them, and now regime change is essentially off the table. You don't hear much about that anymore. Sometimes you actually did used to hear about that from these neocons talking about the North Korean regime. And Gaddafi gave up his nuclear weapon program in the mid-2000s, and he was toppled in barbaric fashion by a US-led NATO coalition. By the way, showing that NATO is not exactly a defensive alliance. There was no defensive purpose in NATO in that whole catastrophe.
If the United States, if Donald Trump, the president of the United States, decides to wage a serious and substantial attack on Iran, is the United States mainland, where you and I and people we know and love and work with and 330 million other Americans live, at risk?
Yes, we still have the strategic soft underbelly of the United States. It's a place called Mexico and the Caribbean Basin. And any number of things could find their way into the United States from that region. We've got probably 30 to 31 million people in the United States about whom we know absolutely nothing that came in over the last 4 years. And as Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard pointed out months ago, we don't know anything about them, but we know that they include many terrorist and criminal organizations from the Middle East and Central America. And we should expect that they will manifest themselves. Now, how will they do it? Where will they do it? I don't know, but we've got numerous nuclear power stations, power grids, and as you know, we have people that are vulnerable in all sorts of places, malls and elsewhere.
Yeah, that's where we're at. The U.S. is sucked into this war. It's not a good thing for Americans. It's certainly not America first. It's not what Trump campaigned on. Macgregor provides excellent military analysis that I can't give. As you guys know, I'm more of a political analyst. And but it's America last. It's Israel first every single time with these Middle East wars. And we've been involved in way too many of them my entire lifetime. They all turn out to be shams. They all turn out to be scams, laundering schemes for the military-industrial complex. I know if you're on the board of Boeing or Raytheon or Lockheed Martin right now, you're probably smiling ear to ear with the prospect of more people dying and thus more people needing to buy your bombs. But us actual patriots don't want to get bogged down in another war for Israel. This has no bearing on U.S. national security. And notice they don't even pretend that. When they're trying to sell this war, they're not even pretending that the U.S. is imperiled by it. They're talking about some mythical nuclear weapons program that the intelligence services of the CIA, Mossad, and MI6 all deny them having. Tulsi Gabbard, who Trump handpicked and used immense political capital to whip senators to vote to confirm her, has said the same. He's brushed her off just over the war propaganda. I think they're close to having one, he said. That's where we're at. It's disastrous. The U.S. should not be involved in this whatsoever. And if you're Trump and Israel really undercut you, blindsided you, you should come out and say that. Who cares about the relationship with Israel? I know it's easy for me to say that because of how entrenched that alliance is in the D.C. swamp and in the deep state, but that's what a man of virtue would do. If you're an actual small R Republican leader that believes in protecting the populace, protecting the civil liberties of the people, not allowing war to destroy your civilization, which I hate to say the U.S. has done for so many years, then you will come out and say, no, We didn't want this strike. In fact, Israel jeopardized our foreign policy objectives with Iran. That's what Trump could do if he was a man of virtue, if this was underhanded. I'm not convinced of that. I think Trump was at least partially in on the planning and lulled Iran into it through these negotiations. But what do you think? Let me know in the comments below. Is Douglas Macgregor right? Is the ramifications he talked about accurate? What do you think the U.S.'s next move is? Is there going to be a hot war with actual U.S. bombing? Are U.S. troops going to be targeted as a false flag and then guaranteeing U.S. entry full bore into this thing? Let me know in the comments below. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and please support me as a YouTube member or a Patreon patron if you have the means to. I'd really appreciate that. And until I see you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. Peace out, guys. I'll catch you in the next one.